Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. Another Big East team preview here with the Creighton Bluejays. Before we dive in, if you are liking the content we've been putting out, please go ahead and like and subscribe. We do appreciate all of your support. But diving into it, right, this Creighton team looks a lot different. Ryan Kalkbrenner not there anymore, which for anyone that's been following college basketball for what seems like the last 10 years, Ryan Kalkbrenner's been at the forefront of Creighton basketball. He's now gone, and so are some of their other key contributors from last year. This team looks quite a lot different, right? Particularly on the offensive side of the ball, and honestly, right, the defensive side, which we'll touch on later with one of the best defenders in the country, Kalkbrenner, being gone. But offensively first, Cody, what strengths do we see in this team?
Yeah, before that, Kalkbrenner, he was there for 5 years, and it felt like 10, like you said, but I still wish he had another season in him. I love watching him play. I love watching him defend. He's one of the greatest at not fouling. I don't think he ever fouled out of a game in his college career, and to do that as a center, taking on as much responsibility as he took, it's a pretty ridiculous feat. And 4-time defensive player of the year in the Big East, and deservingly so. So it's going to be a drop off as we'll talk about in a little bit. But for their offensive strength, it's going to be off ball shooting, as it always is with McDermott teams. He brought in guys like Nick Graves, Josh Dix, Blake Harper, and then he's retaining Jackson McAndrew, Zugic, and Isaac Trout. I think all those guys are more than capable shooting options. Josh Dix will be the leader of this group, I believe, and he shot at 42% from three on 4.8 attempts per game last season. Movement shooting, and I think there's some on-ball shooting there too. Like, he's going to have to take on some responsibility in the pick and roll game, and he's not a fantastic rim scorer, obviously, but I think he's going to be more of a secondary playmaker who can handle some on-ball responsibility if some other guys don't hit, or other transfers don't hit, like that I'll mention here in a few minutes. But yeah, it's going to come in handy, and I think Owen Freeman's going to be a beneficiary of all the floor spacing here. Is he's a really valuable role man. I think it's a pretty underrated skill. I think people like to talk about, his shot blocking ability, his offensive rebounding ability as well. But I think he's a pretty skilled big around the rim, and particularly in short roll situations, I think he can operate with the ball in his hands at times. And if he's going to have 4 floor spacers around him, he's going to be a real beneficiary, and he should allow this team to be fairly efficient at the rim as well. And Greg McDermott teams, like I mentioned, are always great in this area, and they've ranked inside the top 32 in effective field goal percentage nationally in 13 of his 15 years at Creighton. So I'm not really worried about this aspect, no matter what the roster looks like. And the two teams that missed the mark in this area had some perimeter issues, but I think this team's going to be okay in that regard. So Greg McDermott's a fantastic X's and O's coach. He's great in special situations. So this team's going to be just fine.
Yeah, I completely agree. Not really a ton to add. They've got plenty of shooting. They should be able to shoot off the ball. I think on-ball shooting could be a little bit of a question mark, but off the ball, plenty of floor spacing here. And then I think to kind of talk a little bit more about Owen Freeman, I think you're spot on with like his skill set. I think when I watched him, particularly as a freshman at Iowa, he had a lot of creativity around the rim, kind of in that like 6 to 8 foot range, with different kind of footwork things and shot fakes and pivots. And I think he can be a really valuable piece in the center of all of this with, like you said, a bunch of guys around him that are going to be able to shoot it. I think Owen Freeman can be really good for this team if he stays healthy, right? Last year dealt with injury, only played 19 games, I believe. But when he's been healthy and when he's played, he's been pretty impressive. And I think he's going to be able to benefit immensely from playing for McDermott. So I think this offense, again, is going to be pretty solid in the shooting department in particular. And I think like having a coach like McDermott, they'll be fine as a whole anyway. However, there are some concerns, right, that we're not really sure about, right? Like for me, diving into concerns, on ball creation is kind of a question mark, right? You're looking at a guy like Nick Graves, who is really like the guy that projects to be on the ball, him and Dix. And Dix, while he is a talented shooter coming over from Iowa, there are question marks in regards to his on-ball abilities, right? He's never had a usage rate over 18%. His assist rate has kind of hovered in that like 11 to 14, 15% range. He's not a guy that's traditionally played on the ball much, and now going to be asked to do that a lot, right? And then Nick Graves, coming from where's he coming from? Charleston, Charlotte, Charlotte, right? And he has shown strong abilities in creating plays and getting downhill. 18.6% assist rate, 19% the year before, 18% the year before that. So solid, but it's really like, how does it project to the Big East? I think is the biggest question mark, right? Especially for a guy that's like, he's a solid shooter, but not like a wow you kind of shooter, right? He's a guy that a lot of teams may kind of welcome. They might go under. They might be kind of just like looser on ball screens, kind of forcing him to shoot the ball and not letting him get downhill to create plays, right? Because I think of all the guys that are going to be on the floor, he's one that they're going to be happier if he takes the shot versus some others.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's my main concern really with this team is a couple of the transfers that they brought in, I'm not all that high on. And it does kind of start with Nick Graves, who projects to be the highest, on ball usage perimeter option. And then Blake Harper as well, who I'm not really all that high on. I do think Josh Dix can, like I mentioned, I think he can handle some of the on ball responsibility, but it's not a guy that you want the ball in his hands all the time. You want him running off screens as a movement shooter. You want him, create advantages at times need to be created for him. And I'm not sure they have the pieces to really do that. I think they can do it by committee with the spacing, and then Owen Freeman's rim presence, I think, can open up some of these guys. But when it comes to playing some of the elite defenses, I can see where they have some serious issues. And, Nick Graves and Blake Harper, they create most of their value by getting to the free throw line. And like Graves had a 59% free throw attempt rate. Blake Harper 64%. And this isn't a Creighton offense that is really designed for these guys to get downhill and draw fouls or score at the rim. Each of the last 9 seasons, Creighton offenses have finished outside the top 270 in free throw attempt rate. So I just don't think this offense is really engineered for, their strengths really. If they're going to play in more off-ball roles as well at times, which I think there are going to be times, especially with Blake Harper. I don't think he's going to be a guy that you're going to put the ball in his hands and ask him to make plays consistently. Maybe some mismatch stuff in the mid post, and he can draw 2 and make a play from there. But these guys haven't really been all that efficient when they're not getting to the free throw line. Graves 49.2% effective field goal percentage, and the fact that he's not a great spot up shooter, I think, creates a kind of an odd outlook for him. He's just less comfortable off the catch. So if he's not able to, translate on the ball, his burst is a little bit lacking. I don't think he has like a superior handle by any means. So I just think from a talent perspective, I'm a little bit lower on him than some people are. And Blake Harper had a 49.7% effective field goal percentage last year. He was a freshman at Howard with high usage, but I just think he needs to be, a real hit on the ball, making plays for himself and others to be an actual value. Because I have some concerns with him on the defensive side of the floor, and as a catch and shoot option. I think, he only took 83s out of like 360 shot attempts. So I don't think he's a guy that's all that comfortable, shooting the ball or playing off the ball consistently. So, and he was in isolation a ton, and you're not going to see like really any isolation with this Creighton offense. So I just don't think these guys are really great fits. And like I mentioned, like they have guys like Josh Dix who can take on more of a role. Freeman through the post, he can initiate some stuff, and Fedor Zugic, in year 2 of college basketball, I think can provide some on ball value. But if these guys don't hit, I think it sort of creates a rather poor outlook compared to past Creighton teams.
Yeah, I agree. Especially like this team doesn't really have like a guy that can really, at least as of today, that can go get you a bucket. So I think like it does project a little bit differently than in years past. And the same goes for on the defensive side, right? Shifting gears to defense, they now no longer have, Ryan Kalkbrenner, Mr. Just do everything and stay on the floor for an entire game without getting into foul trouble every single night, right? You could always pencil him in for, his minutes and never had to worry about whether you're going to have to look up and see how many fouls does he have. Like he was just going to be out there. He never fouled out, right? So I think big concern in that area because they just don't have the same level of talent, and they also don't have an anchor like they've had in the past that can kind of mask everything if they aren't as strong on the perimeter.
For sure, yeah. I just think the personnel across the roster is a bit rough, and there's 2 players in the starting lineup coming from a pitiful Iowa defense. I mean, it's not really their fault. I think Freeman's a much better defender than his numbers show, I guess. I mean, he had like a 7% or 8% block rate last season. I think he had to do a lot of he just had a ton of responsibility as like a recovery defender mostly. And I don't think this is a defense that emphasizes recovery defense really. It's going to depend on how much responsibility that McDermott wants Freeman to take, and it obviously can't be as much as Kalkbrenner from years past. But I do think his scheme is gonna put a lot of pressure on him, and when they don't have great perimeter defenders to help mask the lack of an elite rim protector, like I'm pretty low on Nick Graves, Harper, and Jackson McAndrew as on ball defenders. It's just point of attack defense with unsure rim protection, I think leads to a pretty dicey outlook. And then just one final stat on McDermott defenses without Ryan Kalkbrenner. I mean, just 3 top 50 adjusted defenses since 2008, and 4 of them have finished outside of the top 100. I just think it brings real questions as to whether McDermott can find like a high level defense without a for sure rim protector. His defense has never emphasized ball pressure, and they've been a bit more passive in order to emphasize transition defense, getting on the glass and staying out of foul trouble. But if they aren't a great first shot defense, I think that creates another major concern if you're not going to put pressure on the ball.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just, I don't know, there's just not a ton of talent on this side of the ball, right? I think that's really what it boils down to. And like Torvik projects them at what, 38th defensively right now, which I think
I'm willing to bet it's way over.
I'd be taking the over on that all day long. I just don't see it. I don't see enough just like wing talent, rim talent, really just everywhere on the defensive end. I could see them kind of getting picked apart, really, which I think will happen at times this year. I think like a team like UConn is going to have a lot of fun playing against this Creighton defense with the way they run their sets, and now like the added talent and shooting that they have. I think it could be big time trouble for Creighton on this side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say is like they always have a pretty high floor on this end. At least it's an analytically driven defense that, filters teams into the mid range a ton. And I think over the years that Kalk was there, the opponent mid range frequency in his era where it was in the 7th percentile, 2nd percentile, 1st percentile, 5th percentile. It's you're not going to give up a ton of catch and shoot threes in this defense. McDermott just sort of emphasizes teams to beat him with dribble creation from the guards, and I think that's going to create a higher floor. Teams can shoot 40% in the mid range, and you're just not going to be all that efficient if that's the only shot you're getting on that possession as well. And, I think this is a team that can defensive rebound well still with the scheme. I think there's some size on the wings at least. Freeman has a 20% career defensive rebound rate. McAndrew 15% on the wing. Blake Harper was 17% last year at Howard, and it was a bigger wing that can help. And then some guys like Jason Green. I think he's probably the best defender on this roster from a pure talent perspective. He can slide in and play the 4 for McAndrew, and maybe even slide down and play the 3 if he really has to. And I think he might be a guy that has to play quite a bit if the defense becomes like a real concern. So I mean, obviously we're going to see a slight dip without Kalkbrenner on the floor in this area. Mid-range frequency from teams. I think some teams are going to be able to put more pressure on the rim. They're going to be able to attack the glass a little bit more, but I think the scheme is going to allow them to be perfectly fine here.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. I think you make a good point. Like it's not like they're going to be the 200th defense in the country. Like they'll be decent enough, just scheme based, but they're not going to be so good, like 37th, like Torvik projects.
I still think they're top 75 to 80 at their floor, just because of emphasizing taking away transition opportunities is extremely important. I mean, your most efficient offense comes in the open floor and when you're running in transition, and he's always, and McDermott teams have always been the best at that. So I think that in itself creates a high floor. Yeah,
for sure. Now shifting before we wrap things up into MVP and X factor, and then ceiling floor for this team.
Yeah, I almost went with the same player for both, but for my MVP, I actually went with Josh Dix. I think there's a real possibility that he has to take on a ton of on-ball responsibility. If a guy like Graves just really struggles to create advantages for others, I think Josh Dix might have to man some of the point guard duties, and I think he's a bit underrated in this area. He's not going to be overwhelming, but I do think he's going to have to be a guy at some point that operates in the pick and roll game, is going to have to, make some off the dribble threes for this offense. I just think his versatility, and his overall like underrated skill set in my eyes, I think gives him a real chance to average, 18 or 19 points per game in this offense. It plays a little bit faster. So I do think he's going to be just fine here. And it's a great fit. Iowa played quick as well, but I think he's playing around better shooters here. So I do like Josh Dix as my MVP. The guy I almost went for MVP was Owen Freeman. I think he's going to be the X factor here. I just think there's so much defensive responsibility, and his shot blocking ability is obviously a plus quality and at the high major ranks, but it's just a matter of, can he stay on the floor consistently, and, can he handle primary rim protection consistently? Because I think a lot of his block shots came from recovery defense off of, his wing personnel that he was playing with just being so bad that and that was a team that they gave up more transition opportunities than Creighton's going to give up. So he was trying to defend basically all 5 guys on the floor, and now at this point he's going to have to handle just the primary responsibility here. So I think he's going to be extremely important in this regard, and finishing at the rim when the floor is open for him with all the floor spacers.
Yeah, no, funny enough, like I did go the same player for MVP and X Factor, and both were Owen Freeman. I think not just what you just talked about defensively, but I think on the offensive end, with the lack of on-ball creation, I think we're going to see them potentially play through him more. I think he's more skilled than we're led on to believe, and I think we're going to see them play through him maybe in like mid-post areas particularly with all the shooting around him. I think he can be effective here. So I think he's going to end up being their most valuable asset, just with the uncertainty of the guard creation and then his defensive strengths, like you just talked about. And then for the same reasons, X factor, I think there's going to be a lot kind of on his plate if he can stay on the floor. That's kind of why he's the X factor. He needs to stay on the floor for this team if they want to be, I guess, at their ceiling, right? He's going to have to be very, very important to them, which kind of leads into now ceiling and floor. I think for me, like third in the Big East again is kind of what I see for their ceiling. I just don't see them being better than St. John's or UConn. I think, like we've talked about in other team previews, it's a 2-team race in this league, and then it's everybody else. So I think Creighton has the potential to get there. And their floor, I think they could finish, I said 7th or 8th. I think the guard creation could be a real problem. If Owen Freeman can't stay on the floor, that becomes more of a problem. So then rim protection is more of an issue. I think they're probably safer in that 3, 4, 5 range, just because the floor of McDermott teams is usually, we've talked about, pretty high. But I think there is a world where they struggle to generate offense out of the guard spot, and they kind of sputter because the defensive talent isn't great. So ultimately, I think they could be there. I don't really expect it, but I think that's as low as they could end up being.
Yeah, I pretty much had the same thoughts. I think there's a world that they can finish second. I'm not super high on St. John's like some people are. So I do think it's in the realm of possibility that they can finish there. If I'm wrong about guys like Nick Graves and Blake Harper, I think there's a higher ceiling than I see at first glance. But yeah, so yeah, I think they're realistically finishing third is there's probably over a 50% chance that they finish dead smack on third place in this league. And they're a 6 or 7 seed in the tournament. That's kind of where I see their ceiling at this point in time. I had their floor as 5th in the Big East. And if they finish 5th in the Big East, there's actually a real chance that they miss the tournament. Greg McDermott teams have made the tournament every year since, actually, no, they didn't make it in 2019, but since 2017, they've made it every other year besides that. So, this is a program that's consistently been in the tournament. But when I look at this roster from a defensive standpoint, I think that could put them firmly on the bubble, just because there are some question marks. Point of attack defense and uncertain rim protection are, it's gonna be an interesting season to see how McDermott changes things, particularly on the defensive side without Kalkbrenner. So, and that was actually my bold prediction is Creighton is firmly on the bubble all season and may miss the tournament for the first time in 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. I can see it for sure. My bold prediction was that Creighton does finish 5th in the Big East.
Wow.
I don't know. I just don't love the team all that much. And I'll actually throw another one in there. I think Owen Freeman makes an all-conference team. I don't know if that's really that bold, but just a prediction I wanted to throw out there. I think he'll be a really good piece for this team, like I've talked about. But I'm just going to say that they finish 5th, and it's obviously, you said, probably a greater than 50% chance they finish 3rd. And I do agree. That's why this is called bold prediction. Yeah. And I think that there is a world where they finish lower, and I just don't really love some of the pieces, don't really love the guards, and ultimately why I predict they're going to end up 5th.
Yeah, if they finish 5th, they're definitely going to miss the tournament. But if they finish 3rd, there's still a chance that they're sitting on the bubble in this league. I think ultimately 3 Big East teams get in because there's going to be a team that finishes what? I think is there 18 games in this league or there's 20 games. 20. I think there's a round robin. So I think there's a chance that like the third place team can finish 14-6, and I think you have to put in a team that finishes there. But I think there's a chance that there's a lot of teams in this league that don't do well in non-conference. There's going to be a lot of pressure on UConn and St. John's to do really well to make those two teams like big time wins in this league. But if they don't gain traction, if nobody gains traction, I think there's a real chance that this is a 2-bid league.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right, we'll wrap things up with Creighton. We'll see what happens this season with McDermott's squad, but we'll see you next time on the Mainly Hoops podcast.